So now what we're going to do is a summary example of how to create an entity relationship diagram using my server. I'm going to take a minute to walk through the server and then we'll have you try this on your own. So what you're going to do is you're going to go to ormond.creighton.edu. Ormond spelled O-R-M-O-N-D. Creighton is right here. .edu. You'll go to this website. You'll go ahead and click login. If you haven't already created an account, go ahead and click the sign up. I will need to approve you after you sign up, so go ahead and do this early. So I'm going to go ahead and click login, and I'll go ahead and enter my credentials and click login. So when you log in, you'll see an interface that looks something like this. So what we're going to do is we're going to click this hamburger menu in the top left. We are going to then go to the course, and we're going to go to our personal directory. Inside the personal directory, we have the ability to create files. So we're going to go ahead and create a new file. Since we are creating an entity relationship diagram, I'm going to just call it summary.erd. So what's critical here is ERD, indicating that we're going to create an entity relationship diagram. It says that it successfully was created. I will go ahead and click on this file. This basically gives us a canvas for us to build our entity relationship diagram. If you're at any time confused on how to use this, go ahead and click this info icon. It will give you instructions as well as keyboard shortcuts that you can use to be able to work with this interface. So in order to create an entity, you just double click the canvas. To add attributes, just double click and then you can add an attribute. If you hit tab, it will automatically create a new attribute. So I could go ahead and create attribute 2. Additionally, if I right click, it gives me access to everything that I need to create or toggle. Then I can double click to create another entity. To create a relationship between the two of these, just drag and drop. It's always going to be mandatory 1 to mandatory many as a start. I can either right click and change this to the cardinality that I'm interested in, and I can single click to just toggle between all 4 different types of cardinality. Now if it was a many-to-many relationship, I would have an entity here as well, and this entity 1 would then become our associative entity. To toggle this as an associative, I'm just going to right click and toggle associative, and that should create the rounded corners. To mark an attribute as an identifier, just right click and say toggle identifier, and so on. Alright, so now that you've had a brief introduction to the user interface, go ahead and pause this video, create this entity relationship diagram on your own, and then come back to compare your answer. Okay, so let's go ahead and go through these. So I'm going to use the entities that we just created. So this first one asks us to create professors that are assigned to one department. So from this sentence, I see 2 different entities. We have professor and we have department. I'm just going to go ahead and delete these 2 as well. All right, the next sentence, let's identify the other entities. It says a department offers many courses. So the new entity that I see here is course. The next sentence says a course may have multiple sections. So let's go ahead and add section. And then it says each section is taught by only one professor. So we already have section and professor. Students may enroll in many sections or none at all. So the next one that I see here as an entity is student. Students may declare 0 or many majors. So the next noun that I see here is major. And students receive a grade at the completion of a section. So we will talk about this one more in depth as we further diagramming. And then it asks us to identify any attributes that exist. So let's go back up. Professors are assigned to one department. So I'm going to drag between professor and department, just hit F2 as a keyboard shortcut, or I could double click inside of this text and I'll say is assigned to. So professors are assigned to one and only one department, and a department has 1 to many professors. So the next thing we see is that a department offers courses. So a department offers 1 to many courses, and a course is offered by one and only one department. The next one is a course may have multiple sections. So a course may have multiple sections, so has, and may indicates optional, so we're going to have optional many. So a course has 0 to many sections, and each section is going to pertain to one and only one course. The next thing is that students may enroll, so it's optional by the may, so students enroll in 0 to many sections, and a section would have 1 to many students inside of it. Students may declare 0 or many majors. So a student is going to declare, and the keyword here is may, so that's optional many. So they may have many majors, and each major has at least 1 student. All right, so the next thing that we're going to do is immediately look at our many-to-many relationships. So we have two many-to-many relationships here. So let's go ahead and create our associative entity. So I'm going to just call this one student major. And I will just click on it, drag this from here to there, and then drag from there to there. And so now, since this cardinality is optional many from student to major, I will change this to optional many, and then I'll toggle this to a mandatory one. So a student declares majors, and a major has many students. Now, don't overuse has. If it makes sense to use has, go ahead and use it, but I don't want you to use that for every single relationship that exists. For student section, let's call this enrollment. So a section has multiple enrollments, and a student can enroll multiple times. So a section is one to many, and a student is optional many, and we can now toggle this to a mandatory one. So a student enrolls in multiple sections, and a section has multiple students. So let's go ahead and clear this up just a little bit. All right, so put the student major down there. So let's go back to this slide. It says students receive a grade at the completion of a section. For example, A, B, C, D, F, or I. So since enrollment is between student and section, that's where we're going to actually capture the grade. All right, since enrollment and student major are both associative entities, we need to toggle them to be rounded corners, so toggle associative. All right, the last bullet point asks us to identify any attributes that may exist for each entity. So let's start with major. So I'm going to start with major ID. So major ID could be like BIA, MBA, FIN, MKT, ACC, etc. Then we have the name of the major, the description of the major, and the total credit hours to get the major. There could be many others, so let's just stop there. And then we're going to toggle the identifier of major ID, saying that's the identifier for that entity. Now let's go to student. The identifier that you have as a student is net ID. Then we have name, which could be composite of first name and last name. Then we have address, which could be composite of street, city, state, zip code. You can even throw country in there if you want. Phone, email, and any other details that we want to track for the student. So let's go ahead and move this up here. I'm going to toggle this as an identifier. Let's go ahead and move all three of these over. To do that, you can hold down Control to select multiple entities. Let's go to the other side. Let's start with professor. So professors also have a net ID, and they have a name. So you know what, rather than adding duplicate information, I'll just go ahead and copy the student entity, and we'll just rename this to professor. And then I'll go ahead and move this relationship over here, and then we can delete this entity. All right, so department, we're going to have a department ID, name, description, location, etc. And department ID is going to be the identifier. All right, so we're going to then move on to course. So we could have a course ID, we could have a name, description, credit hours, etc. So let's toggle course ID as the identifier. Section, we could have section ID. We could have like the section letter itself. So this first section ID could be the CRN when registering. The second one could be like section A, B, C, D, or online W, or night class N, etc. We could have start date, end date, meeting days, etc. Let's toggle section ID as the identifier. And then let's go finally to our associative entities. So the first one is enrollment. So what I'm going to do for our identifier is I'm going to add net ID and section ID, which come from the entities that created this associative entity in the first place. I will toggle these two as identifiers. And then what I'm going to do is just hold down Shift and drag grade to the bottom. I like to have my identifiers at the top. It's not a requirement. The identifiers can be any location that you want. And then for student major, I'm going to just pull in the identifiers from the entities that made up the relationship in the first place, so major ID and net ID. We'll toggle these as the identifier. And then any other pertinent attributes you could think of, you could add them.